right, hello, welcome everyone to WebAssembly Unleashed, your source for news and views about the world of WebAssembly. Our aim is to boost our favorite open standard by being equally open about what we think. I'm your host, Joel Moses. With me as always are my compadres, Oscar Spencer and Matt Yacobucci. Hey guys, how are things?
Excellent. How are you?
Oh, just fine.
Yeah, things are great. Living in the wonderful world of WebAssembly.
Ooh, yeah, and you're doing a lot more in WebAssembly now.
Sure am.
And we'll get to that in just a minute. Today we have kind of a special episode. We actually don't have a community guest this week because I thought it was time to take a look back at the year and see where we are now as opposed to where we were. And then at the tail end, I want to give a little time for us to give our predictions about the year to come. This is episode 15. It marks a little over 1 year from episode 1 of our little WebAssembly Unleashed adventure. We've had a solid year all the way from to today, which is episode 15, during which the world around WebAssembly has just exploded. So it's time to look back, a year in review for WebAssembly, and look ahead, our predictions of what 2025 has in store. But let's catch up a little bit first. I want to check into what's going on with some of the special guests that we've had in the past year. Now, back in episode 3, we had both Bailey Hayes, who's CTO of Cosmonic, and Pat Hickey of Fastly on to talk about WASI. Now, Cosmonic continues to work hard on WASM Cloud with 2 major version updates in the past year, a lot of enhancements to multi-tenancy, a ton of work on provisioning. Bailey's been, of course, a community stalwart.
Yeah, local
meanwhile,
hero, Bailey Hayes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Meanwhile, Pat Hickey has joined us at F5 to continue work on WASM Time and WASI. So that's
Nice.
That's pretty cool. Big change in the past year. Episode 6 brought us Chris Dickinson of Delibso. In the 9 months since we've chatted, Delibso brought out Chicory, which is a JVM-native WebAssembly runtime, which kind of reminds me of the movie Inception a bit, a runtime in a runtime, bytecode in bytecode, which was a pretty interesting concept. Let's see, in episode 12, we chatted with Matt Butcher. In episode 9, Joel Dice, both of Fermion. Since that time, Fermion's been hard at work on adding functionality to Spin. I think
yes.
in 3.1, they added key value support. In 3.0 was a major refactoring, including component support. So a lot of progress going on from Fermion. And of course, our last episode, 14, a chat with Till Schneiderite about Bytecode Alliance. And there's been a ton of change from where we started a year ago in Bytecode Alliance to now. But first, before we get to that, we should cover the changes in core WebAssembly. Now, Oscar, you've been looking at that. What have you seen in core WebAssembly?
So, we always say, oh man, it feels like WebAssembly is moving so slow. But really, so much has happened. Let's just run through some of these super quick. First and foremost, garbage collection. That's a proposal we were talking about for such a long time.
Yeah.
Garbage collection is phase 5 now. And so if you don't remember the phases in the WebAssembly process, phase 5 it's done. It's implemented. So it's in all the major browsers at this point. I know there's at least experimental support in WASM Time. I think it's going to continue to improve there. But this is a specification that's done. We've seen languages like Kotlin able to really take off in the browser because of the fact that we have WASM GC. So that's actually a massive milestone for WebAssembly, especially if you think from the beginning, we've just been dealing with linear memory in WebAssembly, right? But now
do it yourself.
Language implementations don't need to ship a full memory runtime anymore.
That's great.
So that's actually massive. We're going to get smaller binary sizes and a lot of efficiency, right? Like the huge thing behind this proposal is the fact that browsers already have amazing, powerful garbage collectors. You don't need to ship one in every single binary that you do. Yeah. So that's absolutely a huge one. Memory 64 is now a phase 4 proposal. So I think that's pretty interesting. The fact that, hey, yeah, you can have 64-bit pointers and WebAssembly have access to way more memory. And I think what's also interesting is looking at how folks are thinking about using this, right? because really in the browser, like no one is really trying to use more than 4 gigabytes. Like, we always complain, oh, Chrome's eating up all my memory. Imagine seeing a Chrome tab. Yeah.
You can try using that much memory if you
Yeah,
want
you can
to.
certainly
Sure.
try. So I think this is going to have bigger ramifications outside the browser.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see people who are running WebAssembly more in like a security-minded context, like doing things like Docker and whatnot. That's where we're really going to see the big changes there. People who are just straight up using WebAssembly as, hey, this is my portable ISA that I'm using. I think it's huge for that.
Yeah, makes a huge difference in AI workloads as well. Those consume memory like crazy.
Absolutely. And then a couple of proposals that made it to phase 2 in 2024. So wide arithmetic, custom page sizes, JavaScript string built-ins, those all made it to phase 2. ESM integration made it to phase 3. And I got a whole list of phase 5 proposals here. So I'm just going to run through those. Tail calls, extended constant expressions, typed function references. I mentioned garbage collection, multiple memories, relaxed SIMD, branch hinting. These are all things that were completed in 2024.
Wow.
So for all you haters out there saying that WebAssembly is not moving forward, there is so much progress happening on the specification. And that's just core WebAssembly.
That's fantastic. Now, there's been an equal amount of progress, I'd say, on the WASI side. I mean, obviously, it's important to implement things like Memory 64 because that crosses over into what's useful for WASI from core WebAssembly. But WASI had a banner year. Preview 2. That's where it starts.
Yeah, which it's funny to think, like for me in the WebAssembly world, it feels like Preview 2 has been around forever. But it turns out that's not actually true. Preview 2 officially launched in 2024 and was officially made stable in 2024.
Right.
And we've seen many folks, jump on the bandwagon, start building components. Like a big part of the story is the component model, right? Preview 2 was the component model is here. We're actually going to do this. Let's go make it happen. And Preview 2 is just Preview 1, rebased on the component model, right? So it's amazing to see that actually happen and start seeing it being put into tool chains. Like now, there's an official Rust target, right? You can target, what is it? WASI 32P2, I think is the name of the target. Whatever.
And does that build components for?
Yeah.
That's excellent.
So it's already making it into tool chains. I believe there's also a target for the Go compiler. I'm pretty sure. Don't fact check me on that one, but I think that exists. But it's actually, folks are making progress in the community. These things are happening. We're starting to rally around this idea of, okay, we're going to do components. We're going to have this consistent way of interacting between hosts and guests and between guests and guests. And so it's nice to see this start to happen, right? Because we need a standardized way to do it. We want to make sure that everyone in the community has a way to build components and actually get to a point where we're publishing components and everyone's consuming everyone else's components. And we need a consistent way to do that. Right. So it's been fantastic to see the work that's happened on Preview 2. And we'll save the predictions for what's going to happen with that for later in the episode. But I think that's interesting.
And a ton of things, sub-projects moving to phase 2 as well, right?
Yep. We saw WASI GFX, WASI I2C, WASI key value, WASI runtime config.
Got it.
Those all moved to phase 2. So that's actually people have put in work to create spec text around these proposals, which so it doesn't mean that they're even going to happen necessarily, but there's a lot of interest in starting to see a lot of these proposals. This is why we talk about in WASI, hey, WASI's so much more than what WASI P1 was, which was just, okay, here's something that's like POSIX, right? Versus now we're actually looking.
Sorry to cut you off, but like just think about I2C or TWI, for instance, something that I've been pretty interested in. Like this is not so much like an abstraction anymore. Like you're directly going to be interfacing with hardware. Like GPIO, I can light up a pin, I can pull down a pin, I can do all kinds of interesting little IoT sensor type of things with it. So we're getting so far down in the stack with WebAssembly. It's so exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's really exciting to see all these different kinds of proposals coming to WASI as well, right? It's no longer just the POSIX world, right? It's actually people actually care about different devices and interacting with different things. And people care even more to say, I want to do this in a standard way. People
Mhm.
aren't going and just writing their own interfaces and saying, I'm keeping this to myself. People are actually doing this out in the open.
Yeah.
And that's really encouraging for a budding ecosystem like WebAssembly, which it feels crazy to call it a budding ecosystem, but we
Budding.
still are fairly early days for WebAssembly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you've got new proposals floating like WASI USB, WASI Observe, WASI Web GPU, which is
Those
kind
all
of a
came out in 2024. It feels like they've been
I
around
mean,
forever, but
exactly. But no, these are all right there, and that's great. That's great. And we're of course looking towards the future in WASI. So there's obviously going to be, what is it going to be? Preview 3 or 1.0?
It'll definitely be Preview 3, but I think we're going to get a 1.0 right after for sure.
Okay.
So I think the big news that has happened in January was the announcement that Preview 3 is going to try to ship the end of Q1.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's lightning speed.
That's lightning speed. And it has not been in the history of WebAssembly standardization to put such a fine date on things. So this is kind of a commitment from the community saying, hey, we all think this is incredibly important. We're going to try our darndest to get it implemented and out in the world.
Now you can speak with a little more authority on that too, because you're taking on a little bit more of the work here, aren't you, Oscar?
Yeah, which I'm not going to call myself responsible for it. There's tons of folks in the community who are actually doing the hard implementation. As I love to call him out, local hero Joel Dice. Oh man, Joel is incredible and like leading the effort on actually going and implementing async in WASM time.
We didn't talk
rough.
about that. We had Luke Wagner on talking about async. That's we started talking about this in 2024. This is really interesting. So Joel Dice is now working on it.
Yeah, so Joel Dice, Alex Crichton, beautiful crew of folks who are able to just go and implement this. And this is really hard stuff, just let alone just reasoning about it, which is exceptionally difficult. Like if you go and look through all the work that Luke has done on the actual spec to actually folks going and implementing this, it's not easy to go bootstrap an entire async system for WebAssembly components, right? Because that's one of the things we've talked about, right? Is how do you actually do composable async? And one of the design goals for the component model was, well, we don't want to just have function coloring. We don't want to say, oh, this half of the component model does async functions and this half of the component model does sync functions. We wanted to have a way to say, I can actually call this function async, right? Or I can call this function sync, and it'll just do the right thing naturally. Yeah, that is a lofty design goal.
That really is.
Yeah, the fact that any of this is working at all is tremendous, and it's amazing folks in the community who are actually going and writing these implementations, making it happen. Not to mention all the folks who are doing the downstream work of, okay, we need binding generation in all the languages, right? So how I want to be able to write that native async function in whatever language and have it map on the WebAssembly. There are fantastic people doing that work, Yeah. I just try and support folks.
Well, that's good.
in the work that they're doing.
Well, it's a supportive community, so you got a lot of people to rely on. Now, I went back and I actually looked at some of our first 5 episodes, and across our first 5 episodes, we also talked about another topic, which was streams support. How far are we in 2024, and how much farther do we have to go in 2025?
We're pretty far, I'd say. I mean, because to launch Preview 3, it's async and streams. Those are the two things that make Preview 3. And the funny thing is, this is the phrase that Luke had said to a group of us, which is a future is just a degenerate stream, right? It's simply, it's a fantastic phrase. I love it. But a future is simply a stream of one item, right? And so when you think about it, they go hand in hand in terms of implementing them, because we need support to be able to do any kind of streaming. And I think folks are excited to see the WASI IO interface go away.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. No matter where you are, you find, this depends on WASI IO. And it's going to be really exciting to see that proposal drop out when we actually launch Preview 3. So I think folks are super, super excited to just see this nice clean world where we have these nice clean interfaces where we're all happy with our async and streams.
Is
That's
there
great.
are there going to be backward compatibility issues there with Preview 3 then? Like if WASI.io is dropping out or
No, that actually brings up a great point. Another thing that we got in 2024 was a fantastic new versioning process for WASI.
Mm,
So everything is versioned. So I think the current version of WASI, I think, is 0.2.2, I believe. I don't think there's been an 0.2.3. I'd have to double check, but I think the current version is 0.2.2. And so with this versioning process, we're able to say, okay, these are the changes that are happening. Of course, it's all Symverse, so you don't have to worry about breaking changes. You can always say, I'll be able to run my 0.2.0 stuff like just fine. And that's the exact same thing is going to happen with Preview 3. We're not going to tell runtimes, hey, go delete everything that you implemented for Preview 2. It's going to be, all right, let's continue and let's add in the Preview 3 stuff. We'll continue to support it for a while. But I do think there's going to be a point at which when we release 1.0, when it says, hey, this is going to be the thing that we want people to use long term, I can see some runtime saying, yeah, we'll eventually start backing out some of the old support for the preview versions and really just tuning in and saying, yeah, you can use this for the next 10 years just fine.
That's really cool. So let's talk for a moment about the general trends that we're seeing in the community. We've done the specifics. Now let's do the generics. I've seen, of course, a lot of companies, a lot of groups that are focused on making WebAssembly, especially server-side WebAssembly, much more production friendly, make it a more
mhm.
comfortable operating environment. So things like Spin, for example,
Mm-hmm.
are targeting exactly that. What else are some of the general trends that you've seen in the community?
Yeah, one of the ones that I've seen that I think is fairly interesting and this I think really gets into the point of people trying to use WebAssembly in production is the registries, right? I think we saw a lot of
Yeah.
hullabaloo, around WARG, the WebAssembly registry, of creating a
Mhm.
registry specifically for WebAssembly,
Yeah.
which definitely had a ton of merits, a ton of great ideas to it. But it does require you to build out a whole new specification, a whole new set of tooling and whatnot to deal with it. Versus there are registries that exist that maybe aren't quite as perfect and tailored to WebAssembly, like OCI. OCI registries
Mhm.
exist. And so
Mhm.
what we've been seeing folks do is there's actually a ton of tooling out there that works with Word that now also works with OCI. So you're able to just publish your components to OCI. And so we've been seeing a number of companies just doing that because, hey, it works. It's easy to integrate into existing things. So that's been interesting to see is the community say, you know what, let's just use the thing that exists. Maybe we'll come back to it in the future, but yeah, let's just do that. So
So, Oscar, is there a world where that, like, I might just be able to then say Docker pull component and it links and runs with whatever I have running on my system?
that's not too far fetched, right? Because Docker themselves have already done a bunch of work with WebAssembly.
Right.
I don't know if that was 2024 or more 2023, but they did a bunch of work. They added WebAssembly as a new arch in Docker, so you can actually have WebAssembly based images in Docker and pull them down and run on a runtime.
Mm,
So I don't think it's a hop, skip, and a jump to being able to do that with components, right?
yeah.
So
Oh,
I
here's
absolutely think that could happen.
on this vein too. Like, yeah, another 2024 development was the run C shim that's in Kubernetes, so you can run WebAssembly workloads.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, which even reminds me of yet another thing, which was I believe we got container to WASM also
Yes.
came out in
Yeah.
2024, which is,
Right.
hey, I already have this container or whatever, just make it run in WASM. So lots of folks have been messing around with WebAssembly, and I think that really puts us on the precipice of going from people messing around to
Yeah.
everyone starting to have very serious workloads running
Mm,
WebAssembly.
Yeah. On that note, I've noticed that there's external notice from the non-technical community of WebAssembly for the very first time in 2024. So NIST is acknowledging the presence of WebAssembly and its utility in the security space. Analysts are beginning to ask questions about WebAssembly. I saw an article the other day in, I believe it was Forbes of all places, that called WebAssembly possibly the next big thing in artificial intelligence workloads.
huh.
So yeah, there's recognition outside of the community that the work that's going on here is pretty important, and that's great. Also, a lot of companies doing WebAssembly in production. I mean, obviously, we talked with Saul Cabrera in one of our episodes, and Shopify was one of the early adopters of WebAssembly. But we've seen articles published by people like American Express.
Which that's been amazing to see a company like that come out and say, hey, we're doing WebAssembly components because we think it makes so much sense. When it's an organization like American Express, dang well every other bank is going to say, well, we should probably be doing WebAssembly components. And
Yeah,
so I think
sure.
it is going to be a huge boon. I think we're going to see it start spreading across, the financial sector, in addition to all the places it's been now. Because really what we've seen up until now is people who are doing edge computing, who run these large edge networks say, yeah, let's do computation at the edge. That's what we've largely seen.
hmm
And folks have been starting to work on the plugin systems and whatnot. That's where we're really seeing WebAssembly. So it's gonna be interesting to see people who just say, yeah, this is just a great way to have code that's portable, code with clear interfaces that we know is going to be able to link together just fine. It's and this is a part of sort of what I feel like I've been saying for a long time, which is that the component model really will fundamentally change the way developers think about software, right? This ability to take code from any language ecosystem out there and
Mhm.
compose it with code from another language ecosystem. That's massive. When you say, you know what, there's this really fast parser in Rust, let me pull that in.
Yeah.
Let me use the cryptography libraries that are implemented by Go. Let me pull those in.
hmm
This is because the way to do this up until now really was either you have some poor engineer sit down and write bindings between languages, and
Right.
no one has time for that, and it's horribly error prone and huge security issues with that as well, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
So you don't want to do that, or they have to be completely separate apps, right? And you've got to serialize and like, okay, we're sending JSON across a network, and maybe the two apps are even in the same data center, and so maybe it's
Right.
kind of okay. But that's still horribly expensive, right? When we have an opportunity to just have a canonical ABI,
Yeah.
two apps running by the same runtime, just here you go, data's right here, but securely, not leaking things
Yeah.
that shouldn't be leaked
so
between the two components.
it's definitely costly serializing and deserializing and then sending it over the network. The component model still has some serializing and deserializing. What's the status of that work, Oscar?
Yeah, I mean, basically, that's where it is right now. Like, yes, there is a canonical ABI, which, to be fair, for some languages, they're going to have a better time serializing to it or deserializing to it. But the thing about the component model is it has an opportunity to do a bunch of optimizations on that.
Yeah.
So those serializations don't necessarily happen by code injected into the WebAssembly module.
Yeah.
So it can, right? I'm not going to say that it doesn't, but that's why we actually have these canon lift and canon lower instructions in the component model that instructs the component model to do the right mapping here, right? So there's a huge opportunity to do optimizations there. And this is
Yeah.
why also with garbage collection, it's super interesting, because in the world of linear memory, you actually do have to do some amount of copying between memories, or in the background, try and say, these two modules have access to the shared region of memory, which gets a little scary, but like you can do some formal verification and prove that it's correct in this particular case. But with WebAssembly GC, you have objects that are kind of just opaque. They just sort of exist. And especially if they're immutable objects, there's nothing stopping you from just sharing those two objects between two modules, right?
Wow.
There's nothing that breaks security, like from a security perspective, do that, because you're not giving access to just, here's a region of memory, right?
Yeah.
And so with WebAssembly GC, you actually have a huge opportunity to get rid of so much of the serializing and deserializing that happens in the component model.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then,
Sorry. I feel like we should have an episode on GC because it's more than just garbage collection.
oh
It
yeah,
is
Yeah.
a representation of objects and a way to deal with objects outside of just their lifetime, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that, Oscar. I had not thought about the combination of garbage collection and the component model being kind of the ability for the developer to use the best of the best, combine ecosystems together, and use one ecosystem for what it's good at and the other ecosystem for what it's best at.
hmm
And that's pretty exciting stuff. So it's time we have to do our predictions for 2025. So who wants to go first?
Well, geez. I'm terrible at this, but I'm going to go first because I really I want to get myself out of the way to hear what Oscar has to say. But
Hmm.
right, so outside looking in, I'm an outsider. I'm looking in, and I'm trying to use WebAssembly for certain various tasks that I'm doing. I think not that WebAssembly isn't mature, but it's young. But we're going to enter into this maturation phase of you said it, Oscar. American Express is using it. Microsoft has just in January announced Hyperlight, which they call them micro VMs, but I really think they're sandboxed WebAssembly components. You're going to see larger and larger corporations adopting this stuff, using it in anger. That means developer experience is going to improve because tool chains are going to mature, compilers are going to mature. For instance, TinyGo is where you go to compile Golang. And can I say Go more times in one sentence? But the official compiler is supporting WASM targets. I think they're going to mature. So what I mean by maturation is it's going to really congeal and solidify around tool chains and usability.
Yeah, so I'll go next because I too want to hear what Oscar has to say.
Sure.
Although I do fully acknowledge that because of your role in the Bytecode Alliance, you have a way to make your prediction happen.
I can certainly try.
So maybe your finger is on the scale. So here's my prediction. I'm going to agree with some of the analysts that I've read. I think WebAssembly on the server will gain new prominence in security and AI workloads. AI workloads, almost by definition, use differing platform types underneath because certain portions of an AI operation have to be power efficient and certain have to be performance oriented, and you choose different processor types underneath that. But you don't necessarily want to build two separate tool chains, two separate pipelines to generate the code that you need to support that. And so I think that the adoption, the rapid adoption of multiple platform types is going to accelerate the interest in WebAssembly. But that does mean the upshot of it is WASI NN will need to diversify from being very specific to certain GPU types. I think WASI Web GPU will need to formalize. The elements that plumb into AI workloads directly are going to have to get a lot better and a lot faster. So I think we're going to see some fairly aggressive community work in that area.
All right. My predictions.
Here we go.
All right. So the first one is on the WASI Preview 3 happening at end of Q1. Balderdash. Which I know in my position, it feels really like, doesn't sound like a vote of confidence. But I think realistically, I think we'll be really close by the end of the quarter. For sure. I think we'll be super close. I imagine it's probably going to ship in Q2. That's probably my real guess, is that we're actually going to ship Preview 3, and then we'll actually get a WASI 1.0 certainly before the end of the year. I feel like that's absolutely going to happen.
Okay.
Beyond that, I really think you're right on the money, Joel. I actually think WASI NN, we're going to see a resurgence there. Not because anyone in the WASM community is necessarily doing AI stuff right now, but we're just going to see so many people from the outside saying, hey, this is actually a really handy way of representing, either different pieces of logic that want to interact with models and things like that. I actually do think we're going to see a bunch of interesting stuff with WASI NN for sure. I also predict we're finally going to change the name of WASI. I think it's not going to be WebAssembly System Interface. I think it will be WebAssembly Standard Interfaces, as we actually have been showing, hey, here are so many different interfaces that are not for a particular system.
That's right.
I think we actually are going to see that real change happen.
Okay. That's a good callback to episode 3. I think Bailey and Pat both predicted eventually we'd have to rename it. So
yeah, absolutely. Cool. So I think that's going to happen in 2025. And I think overall, 2025 is going to be marked as the year of the start of modern day WebAssembly. Fundamentally, I think seeing WASI 1.0 is going to be the marker that says, okay, now we're all rallying around this, because as you've seen so far, right, there are millions of devices in the world that are running WASI Preview 1.
Oh yeah.
Which, it's fabulous software. I'm not going to say it's not great, but, it was a preview version. Preview 2 coming out, or Preview 2 out now, which we're trying to get adoption on. Preview 3 coming. These still were all preview versions. So I'm really excited to get to a point where we can tell the world, hey, this is stable. Go use it. Start putting it in your tool chains. And I think this is going to be the start of the WebAssembly revolution. So you heard it here first.
That could be a sea change moment for sure. Like 1.0 means a lot to a lot of people.
It really does. And what's funny is, as far as I know, there is no planned difference between WASI 1.0 and Preview 3. They're exactly the same, but just calling it 1.0 is
it's a big step.
Difference.
It's an insurance policy, right? You get an insurance policy on it.
Yeah.
It's a psychological step, I think, that's pretty meaningful for the community too.
Yeah, I think about, every CTO out there that's been watching WebAssembly, on the moment they see, oh, this is stable. We can actually go invest in this as an organization. I think that's huge. I think it's absolutely massive.
Well, that's great. Okay, so I've recorded all of those. It is recorded for posterity, so we will be back in a year's time to figure out exactly how much of a hash we made of it, maybe. And with that, that's all the time we have for today. Again, we'll be back next year and we'll check in. As always, if you found our discussion enlightening as a listener, we do these all the time. Make sure to hit like and subscribe and keep up to date with new episodes. For myself, Oscar, and Matt, thanks for watching. And as always, it's time to unleash the power and promise of WebAssembly. Until next time, take care.